Hello and welcome everyone to Tuesday's edition of Alaska Weather, this 9th day of August 2022. I'm David Percy. Up first, we've got hazardous weather graphic, and the flood advisory continues tonight until early afternoon Wednesday for the small streams and rivers draining the Talkeetna Mountains as local flooding of some roads continue, which has resulted in some road closures, and that's expected to continue tonight through tomorrow morning, and then due to end at 12:45 Wednesday afternoon, or kick it out a little longer again. It looks like it'll probably be ended by midday tomorrow. And for satellite imagery, you can see skies clearing out over the southwest interior, especially out over the Bering Sea, right on up into the Chukchi Sea. But stream of moisture there along and just south of the eastern Aleutians, spreading northeastward there in toward Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, keeping it cloudy and kind of showery, especially the farther south you go in south central Alaska, with rainfall today, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, eastern interior areas. Fair amount of sunshine over the central and southern southeast coast today, with a few showers up in the north there. Cordova picked up about 1/3 of an inch of precipitation today, and Paxton in the Copper River Basin had about just under 1/2 an inch in the last 12 hours, ending at mid-afternoon today. And then farther to the north, Eagle picking up about 1/3 of an inch, and in the Yukon Flats there, and as much as 2/10 of an inch reported in some areas, other areas seeing less. You can see in the Kuskokwim Valley there, spreading up almost in toward the Fairbanks area, some partial clearing, but much more widespread clearing as you head southwestward there. Seward Peninsula looking pretty good as well. Infrared showing developing system, eastern Aleutians, developing on the east side of some building high pressure over the Bering Sea. That's going to bring gale force winds to the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula tonight and into tomorrow, with that gradient, those northwest winds kicking up 30 to 40 knots. Otherwise, again, some rain into Kodiak Island and kind of showery rainfall amounts, lighter today than they have been, definitely than yesterday. And you can see low pressure up there over the eastern North Slope, eastern Brooks Range, keeping it wet up in that area around Arctic Village, and kind of tapering off back to the west. On the chart today, again, drying out from west to east there, high pressure building over the Bering Sea, and kind of a weak low there over the Alaska Peninsula, and moisture sliding northeastward along that frontal boundary there from just south of the eastern Aleutians, right on up into Kodiak Island, keeping it cloudy and damp along the North Gulf Coast, kind of showery south central Alaska, but more rainfall, as we mentioned, into the Copper River Basin and up along the eastern interior areas. And some of that shower activity getting into the northern panhandle, otherwise southern areas seeing, again, a fair amount of sunshine with high pressure. And for tonight, again, looks like it'll be dry, just variably cloudy over the northern southeast coast, to mostly clear central and southern areas down toward Dixon Entrance. Weak low keeps it unsettled and showery for the North Gulf Coast, with some scattered light showers occurring over the Kenai Peninsula, south central Alaska, northern Cook Inlet, Manuska Valley. But weak high pressure at the surface, tending to shut the moisture off over the central interior, and we'll see increasing clearing as well as time goes on. A couple of troughs going over the top of that ridge in the central and interior there, keeping rain and snow going depending on your elevation and time of evening tonight from the eastern Arctic coast down across the Brooks Range. And winds on the increase, picking up to gale force tonight for the eastern Aleutians with that low just south of the Alaska Peninsula. Rain spreads back into Kodiak Island tonight, and then for tomorrow that rain will spread northeastward. Southern Kenai Peninsula, Kamishak, Kachemak Bay, south of Anchor Point to Homer. Looks like a pretty good chance of rain the entire day for Kodiak Island. Locally moderate to possibly briefly heavy for the eastern North Gulf Coast, pushing into Yakutat. Chance of rain increases over the southeastern Copper River Basin, Wrangell Mountains. And the northern panhandle will see increasing chance of rain, but the southern areas stay dry with mostly sunny skies and mostly sunny there. It looks like northern Cook Inlet, Susitna Valley, even the Matanuska Valley in the afternoon should see an improvement. The temperatures rebounding, 60s to maybe lower 70s, all the way up to about the Yukon River. And then more clouds, keeping it a little cooler on up to the Arctic coast. Definitely drier, some lingering showers over the Seward Peninsula and Yukon Delta coast. And the outlook for Thursday, we've got another trough there, keeping it unsettled with some moisture there for the eastern Arctic coast into the eastern North Slope, and then kind of cutting back down into the Brooks Range, northern Koyukuk Valley areas, tapering off to just some scattered showers. Otherwise, mostly sunny. Interior Alaska, Yukon Flats, back along and south of the Yukon River into at least northern Cook Inlet. Temperatures 60s to lower 70s. Out to the southwest coast. Bering Sea looking dry with light winds. Those gale force winds start to diminish. Still looking at small craft advisories as that low center pulls to just south of Kodiak Island. The tighter gradient weakens a little bit, but it'll still be quite windy with northwest winds possibly gusting 40 to 45 miles an hour across the Alaska Peninsula in those normally windier areas like King Cove, for example. And rain moderate to briefly heavy, possibly. Best chance of heavier rain coming into Kodiak Island. That'll be pushing up to the south coast of the Kenai Peninsula. And that'll start to increase the clouds late in the day over south central Alaska, but keep rain staying south of Cook Inlet generally, except for southern Cook Inlet through the day. Chance of rain or showers for the southeast Copper River Basin areas and into the northern half of the Panhandle, but keeping maybe a hold of some sunshine over the central and southern southeast coastal areas. And the Bering Sea, again, light winds with a fair amount of clearing out there for the Pribilofs, dry with light winds, maybe some sunshine also for the eastern Aleutians, westward to Chimionat-2. Then you can see a big, huge precipitation shield with a system farther out toward the Sea of Okhotsk and Amchitka Peninsula. Anyway, moving on to the lows tonight, mid to upper 30s to near 40 for the Brooks Range. Brooks Range mostly in the 30s. North Slope and Arctic Coast, upper 30s to lower 40s. Mid 40s there for the northwestern areas, Kotzebue, Kobuk, or the Noatak Valley near 40 in the Kobuk Valley. Upper 30s to lower 40s there for the southwest interior, lower to mid 40s out toward the coastline, mid 40s St. Lawrence Island and the Pribilofs, and in the 40s for the Aleutians to near 50 out toward Chimionat-2, and then upper 40s to lower 50s for the Alaska Peninsula, Sandpoint and Chignik, both in the lower 50s, as well as Kodiak Island, low of about 53. Otherwise, south central Alaska, lower 40s Susitna Valley to near 40 in the Copper River Basin. Eagle, forecast low 27 degrees tomorrow morning. Otherwise, the Panhandle, 50 to 55 for your overnight lows. And then for the highs, Wednesday afternoon, lower 60s there, coming up from that low of 27, should reach a high of 62, some sunshine there for Eagle. Otherwise, in the Fairbanks area, 60 to 65, give or take. They're a little cooler, having a hard time pushing 60 down toward North Pole and the North Waitok area, but should reach the lower 60s in the Copper River Basin. Southern Panhandle, 70 to 75 for the highs optimistically. Definitely cooler with cloudier, damper conditions over the northern Panhandle and the North Gulf Coast. Highs in the lower 60s, Kodiak Island, mid 60s, Bristol Bay, and 60 to 65 over the Kuskokwim Valley and Kuskokwim Delta area, but upper 40s to lower 50s for the Seward Peninsula, and 50 to 55 out over the Aleutians. Highs in the 40s and 50s for the North Slope and the Arctic coast, as well as the Brooks Range. Thursday morning lows, 40 to 45 over the Arctic coast, and upper 30s for the central and eastern Brooks Range areas, Arctic Village, low 39, Anatuvik Pass 38. In the mid 40s for much of interior Alaska, some areas upper 40s, Bristol Bay in the lower 50s, and in the 50s for the Panhandle, mid 50s Kodiak Island. Highs for Thursday afternoon, 68 to 72 for the Susitna Matanuska Valley, and a little cooler over the southern Panhandle, but pushing 70 in the interior.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather, marginal VFR central eastern Arctic coast, eastern North Slope into the Brooks Range, and also some marginal VFR along the southern south side of the Brooks Range, northern Kobuk, Koyukuk valleys. Mostly VFR in the interior with some marginal VFR up across the Copper River Basin, up into the mid to upper Tanana Valley and areas. IFR along the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, up into the eastern North Gulf Coast, and the northern Panhandle, VFR over the southern half of the Panhandle, southern Bering Sea and the Aleutians, quite a bit of marginal VFR, and then some IFR, St. Lawrence Island to the Bering Strait. And for the afternoon, that area of IFR increases over the northern Bering Sea, just north of St. Matthew Island now to the south coast of the Seward Peninsula through the Bering Strait, now along the northwest coast. Marginal VFR, western central Arctic coast, becoming VFR on the east side, and the interior looking pretty good with mostly VFR flying, some marginal VFR for the Brooks Range, IFR eastern North Gulf Coast, Cape St. Elias eastward into the northern quarter of the Panhandle, marginal VFR in the central areas, and then VFR down to the south. IFR holding for Kodiak Island, Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, mostly marginal for the Aleutians, with some scattered VFR over the central Bering Sea. And for the day, Thursday morning, Bering Sea, marginal VFR with areas of IFR, especially a band just east of the Pribilofs down toward False Pass and up into the northern Bering Sea, Yukon Delta Coast, Norton Sound, Seward Peninsula there through the Strait, and some IFR along and south of the central and western Brooks Range, IFR for the central western Arctic coast, central eastern North Slope, marginal VFR, and some pretty good VFR near and south and southeast of the Yukon River Valley, right on down into Cook Inlet, but marginal VFR, southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak, Kachemak Bays into Prince William Sound, northern Panhandle, Kodiak Island, and from Adak westward, looks like it'll be IFR for the morning. And for the afternoon, southwest Bering Sea to about Adak westward to the Komodorskis, all IFR. Then some marginal VFR over toward the Pribilofs, Atka Island, Fox Islands, and another band of IFR north side of the Alaska Peninsula, right on up along the Yukon Delta Coast, St. Lawrence Island, and just grazing the northwest coast there, and maybe Point Barrow, otherwise the Arctic coast, marginal VFR, VFR for the North Slope, some marginal VFR along and south of the Brooks Range, good VFR in the interior, and marginal VFR now Prince William Sound into eastern Turnagain Arm, southern Cook Inlet, IFR Kodiak Fognak Island, and marginal VFR with some areas of VFR for the southeast coast. And for the passes, Anatuvik and Adigan, IFR to start, marginal VFR into the afternoon and evening. Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR tomorrow, especially in the afternoon. And rainy, VFR. Windy, VFR. Isabel looking good with VFR flying. And Mentasta, VFR. Tanita, VFR. And Portage starting out marginal VFR and then becoming VFR, especially even on the eastern entrance. And for Chilkoot and White, looks like IFR flying there. And for the freezing levels, 2,000 feet eastern Arctic coast, and at the surface tomorrow morning, right along the eastern Arctic coast as well, 4,000 feet down in toward the Yukon Flats, 6,000 feet into Copper River Basin, Susitna Valley, otherwise sloping up to 10,000 feet there for the North Gulf Coast, Kodiak Island, 14,000 feet over the western Aleutians. Icing southwest flow brings another slug of moisture northeastward with that next system in across the Aleutian Range and coming up to the south side of the Alaska Peninsula, Chignik, maybe Sand Point eastward into Shelkoff Strait and Kodiak Island, with light to isolated moderate rime icing for the eastern North Gulf Coast and scattered across the eastern interior all the way up to the Arctic coast. Jet stream westerly 65 knots, 33,000 feet for the North Slope, and stronger winds around that low coming up to the Alaska Peninsula, southwest 70 knots, turn west 75 knots over Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, and 9,000 feet, 45 knot westerlies on the North Slope, and 60 knot northerlies on the Alaska Peninsula, 3,000 feet, 60 knot north-northeast winds on the backside of that low for the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise turbulence, moderate chop for the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, Kodiak Island.
So that Galena flood back in 2013 was at the intersection of weather and climate. Rick, I often get questions about the difference between weather and climate. How do you distinguish between the two?
Well, that's a really good question, John. One of the analogies that I like to use, the wardrobe analogy. So in my closet, in my dresser, I've got clothes appropriate for 90-degree weather and 50 below weather. That's the climate part of my wardrobe. Well, what I'm going to put on today, am I going to wear my Hawaiian shirt because it's going to be a hot July day, or am I going to wear my bunny boots because it's going to be 50 below? That's the weather part of my wardrobe.
You know, there's another interesting analogy. I've heard it said that climate is like your personality, whereas weather is like the mood you're in today. It's like that old John Denver song. Some days are diamonds and some days are stones. That's how weather works.
Of course, it's really a continuous range. Just as the Galena ice jam flooding was the result of a weather event, that ice jam, up against that cold spring, a climate event. So too with less impactful events. For instance, a daily record high temperature is a weather event, one day's high. But we put that in a climate context, say comparing to a century or more of individual temperatures on a given date.
So these extreme events like record high temperatures also happen on the seasonal time scale. Just in the last few years, we've had what was called a marine heat wave in the waters south of Alaska, the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea. But the water temperatures in that area set new records in 2015 and 2016.
And most Alaskans are acutely aware that big wildfire seasons are becoming more and more common, most recently in 2015. And the frequency of million-acre seasons has doubled since the early 1990s.
Just this past winter, we had another event in the Bering Sea. The ice extent in the Bering was lower than it had ever been in the last 150 years. That's about as far back as the good records go. There'd never been another year like this one in the Bering with so little sea ice. That had major impacts on the communities along the west coast and the northwest coast.
So, John, what have you been hearing from folks around town about these kind of climate extremes?
I've heard from a number of people who've been here a long time that winters just aren't what they used to be. The average temperatures are higher than they were back in the 1960s and 1970s, and we just don't get the extreme cold days, the days down in the minus 50s or even the minus 60s that we used to experience in Fairbanks back in the 1960s, 1970s, and even into the 1980s.
Well, and it's not just winter either. 2016 and 2017, the summers brought unusually muggy, humid weather to Fairbanks. We're not used to thinking of that in interior Alaska, but record high humidities during the summer months. As in the winter, we've had a significant increase in freezing rain events, since about 2000. So much so that DOT has changed their road treatment strategy, and now we have the school district building in winter rain days into the calendar. And of course, we all need good weather forecasts for these high impact weather events.
We know, though, that weather forecasts are sometimes wrong just 3 or 4 days in advance. So if these weather forecasts and the models they're based on can't pick up events like freezing rain 3 or 4 days ahead, how can we believe what they say about climate for the future?
Well, that's a really good question, John. And I think the important thing to remember is that parts of the system are predictable.
So climate models can't give you weather for particular days or even for particular months or years. They actually predict averages. These are averages over periods of a decade or two, or even averages over periods of several years. So they don't give us the month-to-month information that we might want. What are they telling us about the future, though?
Well, these climate models are telling us on the decades-long time frames that warmer winters are going to become more common. We're going to have more frequent, very low sea ice years with late freeze up and early meltout. And the same will be true on Alaskan rivers. We'll have more frequent seasons when freeze up is late and break up is early.
One of the other common threads in these climate model predictions is that heavy rain events and heavy snow events will become more common in the future. That's actually a prediction that the models make for mid-latitudes as well as for high latitudes in areas like Alaska. So we can expect the heavy downpours to become heavier and the heavy winter snows to become heavier than we've been used to. They're also predicting more frequent freezing rain events, getting back to what you talked about earlier. These events that might have happened just once every year or two in the past could actually end up happening several times in a winter in the future, according to the climate models.
And it is important to remember that even in a warming world, there are still going to be seasons and years that are colder than the average, but these cold seasons will become less and less common. So, John, maybe I don't need to have those bunny boots in my closet anymore?
Well, at least you won't need to wear them as often as you did in the past.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at today's sea ice analysis. Still kind of melding in place a little bit and shifting around there for the central eastern Arctic coast, and then over toward Wrangel Island. And that area along the eastern Arctic coast is melding in place. A lot of a lot of small ice pieces left in there among the open water, and as soon as that melts out, then it'll be open to navigation here probably over the next couple of weeks, maybe. Anyway, moving on to coastal water forecasts. Small craft advisories there along the coast of Prince of Wales Island Wednesday for north winds at 25 knots. Otherwise, northwest to southwest winds 15 to 20 knots on the central coast, and 20 to 30 knot winds from the south and southwest on the north coast. By contrast, light variable winds over Lincoln Island Glacier Bay, light winds from the south for Stevens Passage at about 10 knots, and then northwest winds 20 knots for Clarence Strait. For the south coast on Thursday, northwest winds 15 knots, and southerlies 20 to 25 knots there for the north coast, and even 30 knots to the eastern North Gulf Coast out of the southeast. But the inside waters and inner channel staying light and variable, 5 to 10 knots from varying directions, and seas pretty slight at 2 feet. Prince William Sound, variable winds 10 knots, seas 2 feet. North Gulf Coast, northeast winds 15 to 20 knots. And small craft advisories for the Barren Islands, northeast winds at 25 knots. Northeast winds 20 knots for the Kamishak Bay area and Cook Inlet, north to northeast breeze 15 to 20 knots, strongest south of the Forelands. And for the day Thursday, for the Middleton Island area, eastern North Gulf Coast, look for southeast winds 25 knots. And Prince William Sound, east winds 15 knots, 3-foot seas there. Northern Cook Inlet, winds will be northeast of 15 knots, but small craft advisory south of the Forelands, north winds 25 knots. Kamishak Bay, northeast winds 25 knots. And for the Barren Islands, small craft advisories, southeast winds 30 knots with 6-foot seas. Kodiak Island, southwest winds 20 knots. Shelikof Strait, northeast 25 knot winds in the forecast. Gale warnings there for the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. Northeast winds tomorrow, sustained 40 knots, seas 13 feet. Bristol Bay, northeast winds 25 knots with 5-foot seas. And for the day Thursday, gale warnings for the Alaska Peninsula. Northwest winds 30 to 35 knots with seas around 10 feet. And east side of Kodiak Island, winds will be southeast at 15 knots. Small craft advisories for Shelikof Strait for northeast winds at 25 knots, seas 5 feet. In Bristol Bay, looking at a north wind on Thursday at 20 knots. And for Unalaska Island, tomorrow, gale warnings. North to northwest winds 40 to 45 knots. Unmak Island, north winds 30 knots. Adak and Atka, north at 20, and then 15 to 20 knot winds from the southeast and northeast from Amchitka Island to Shimia. And for Thursday, western Aleutians, south winds 20 to 25 knots. Central Aleutians, southwest 15 to 20 knots. And eastern Aleutians, west-northwest winds 20 to 35 knots with seas as high as 9 feet. Southwest coast, small craft advisories, Kuskokwim Delta coastline, north at 30 knots. Small crafts for the Pribilofs, north 25. Southwest winds 25 knots for St. Lawrence Island, and west winds 25 knots for St. Matthew Island. And for Thursday, west-southwest winds 20 knots for the Yukon Delta coast and St. Lawrence Island. West winds 25 knots there for the Kuskokwim Delta coast with seas at about 6 feet. Southwest 25 for St. Matthew Island, and the Pribilofs looking at a west wind at 20 knots with 5-foot seas. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, west-southwest at 20. Small craft advisories though for the western Arctic coast all the way down to Wales for south to southwest winds at 25 knots. And small craft advisories continue from Wales to Cape Beaufort on Thursday. South winds 25 knots. Otherwise, west-southwesterlies at 20 knots the remainder of the coastline. For tonight, starting to dry out slowly, although still rain and showers along the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound. More rain slides into Kodiak Island with that next system. And then the winds on the increase there over the eastern Aleutians, that tightening gradient with high pressure building over the Bering Sea. And that low spreads rain up along all of the North Gulf Coast into the northern Panhandle tomorrow. Sunny and warmer over the central and southern interior. Bering Sea looking good through Thursday. Rain and clouds start to push into southern Cook Inlet, and it's wet from the North Gulf Coast. Otherwise, mostly sunny in the central interior.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.